Coming live from Franklin County, Massachusetts, United States, is our guest tonight. Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here, either with experts through their industry insights or information, or simply learning from them. But before I move forward, may I request you to subscribe, follow, like, and comment on whichever platform you are watching or listening to this show on. And today we have got Dr. Maul, President and CEO of Windhorse Consulting and Seminars. He's a business consultant, he's an executive coach, mindfulness teacher, keynote speaker, and so many things. And so today we'll talk to him about how to move beyond blame in life and fearlessly live your highest purpose. Welcome to the show, sir. Welcome to India.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be with you, Ajay.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. So the topic, you are an expert on this topic. You've got a book. You have written so much on this subject. You talk to so many people around it, and to everybody that you interact with, whoever, whether it's business or to your students. So for us, if you can tell us, what does this purpose thing, what is this purpose in life? How does know what is purpose and how to find it and where to find it?
Well, it's a challenging question. And, we had a big online summit back in January called The Best Year of Your Life. And the first day of that summit is focused around finding your purpose, your vision for your life. And sometimes we talk about that as our calling. And, sometimes our calling or our purpose finds us. I think that maybe more often it happens that way, that our purpose or our calling just comes knocking on our door through some kind of life events that get our attention, right? But
Right.
if we're at a stage in our life where we're not clear about really what our purpose is, why are we here on the planet? We're all here for a reason, right? None of us are an accident. We're all really important. We're all loved. We're all incredibly important. We all have so much to give, and we're all here for a reason. So if we're not clear about that, it's often helpful to do journaling and develop a daily practice of just writing reflections about what we're feeling, what we're thinking, what's important to us, what motivates us, what disturbs us, what are we attracted to. And if we do a regular practice of journaling like that, and then go back and revisit, look at, peruse what you wrote over the course of a week or something, and then another week, you'll start to identify some threads of what really is important to you and what really motivates you. Obviously, we all have to take good care of ourselves if we're going to live well and thrive on the planet. And then for many of us, a big part of our purpose is our family and taking good care of our family and supporting our family, and then our community as well. And, just being a good global citizen, participating in our global community and in a way that we're adding value. So generally, you could say our human purpose is to add value. And our human purpose is to grow and thrive and evolve spiritually. But then we each have our unique form of that. So one of the purposes that I landed on is to rid the world of blame and shame, to try to get blame and shame out of human society. Just a little small project. But another very big focus of mine is bringing transformation to our criminal justice systems and public safety systems. Well, I ended up spending time in prison myself based on drug charges. So through that experience of being there for 14 years, it became really clear that one of my life purposes was to take what I learned there and help others going through that experience and help transform our criminal justice and public safety systems so that they become places of healing instead of being destructive, in which they are in many cases, and also the people working in those systems. I mean, our current prison systems around the world are often destructive, not only for the prisoners, but for the people that work in them. And so, it became my passion to bring transformation to that world. So that's a big part of my work. But I also saw how through that experience and through just being in the world, I began to really see that that our world society is it's carrying an unsustainable load of a toxic load of internalized blame, internalized oppression, internalized shame and violence. And that is always, and internalized trauma. And we have this collective load of internalized shame, blame, and trauma. And that is always going to keep erupting in cycles of violence, and which creates more shaming and more trauma. So somehow we have to turn that around. We have to try to prevent as many events from happening that create trauma and shame and blame for people. And we also need to find ways to heal that collective trauma. And so, that kind of became my life purpose. And also, the thing about blame in particular, what I discovered, uh, mostly through the ending up in prison, and we could talk more about that. But what I discovered was that, it's natural that we blame, right? Because we're all very vulnerable, tender-hearted human beings, and we've all been blamed for things, and that we don't like that. It's shaming, and so we don't want any more of that. And we've been kind of educated and enculturated to believe that when something bad happens, somebody must be to blame. Somebody has to be to blame. So if I don't want to be blamed myself, I better find somebody else to blame, right? So we almost instinctually deflect blame. And we shouldn't feel bad about that because it's just human. But the problem is that when we do that, we give our power away. So
Right.
when I discovered that became my purpose and passion, to help people see that as normal as it is to want to blame things on other people, it's not in our own interest because we give our power away. Because when I'm upset about things, unhappy about things, I feel like I'm being victimized or I'm suffering with things, and I'm convinced it's somebody else's fault. I just put that other person or persons or situation in charge of my internal state. Because can I control other people? No. I can't, the only place I have any real influence is with myself. And that's hard enough, as we know. But we cannot control other people. We can't control the world. So when I blame, as normal as it is, I'm actually giving my power away. It doesn't make any sense. So radical responsibility or ownership is about choosing to put my energy where it can do the most good, which is with my own choices. Embracing that philosophy just completely changed my life for the better. And so it became my purpose to try to get that message out to other people in any way that I can.
Perfectly all right. So you have put it nicely. Now let us go a bit back to 1985, if I'm
Yeah.
correct, because that's where I would say a lot of things started for you, when you had to uh, see prison because of drug trafficking charges. Now the first thing that comes to mind is that either people blame themselves or they blame them their fate. Did you blame, because through your life through your life a lot of learning can be achieved, for because I see you that you a lot of people in that situation would just let their life go away from their hands and not just but you did not let that happen, and that is why today that became a very distinct of the past, a point of reference, and you are a symbol of, it's inspiration today for a lot of people, and I see it that way, sir, and I'm very happy to talk to you today if I look at it that way, because you did not let anything, any setback, whatever way it was, to let it affect you to such an extent. In fact, you used it as a stepping stone, and you are where you are, and you are not only you made your own life, but you are making, lives for so many other people all across the world. So my question is, did you blame yourself, and how did you take it up from there?
Yeah. So it's a really important question. So I was fortunate, and I have kind of a mixed story, right? Because I came of age in the 1960s, early 70s, an angry young man, went headlong into the counterculture of the time, got involved in drug experimentation and eventually drug trafficking. Um, but I was always a spiritual seeker, and I'd always been pursuing that my whole life. And so I had this kind of split life. I spent part of the time involved in that craziness of the drug world, and And, I also left the United States because I was angry. I was living in South America as an expatriate, and I justified, being involved in that drug trafficking activity as a way to live outside the system. And also, the system is hypocritical, the system's bad. And, so I had all this us versus them thinking. And, but at the same time, I was still pursuing, a spiritual path. And so they were kind of mixed up. And before I could untangle them, I earned my way into a federal prison sentence. So when I was sent to prison in 1985, I originally received a no parole sentence, a 30-year no parole sentence. I was 35 years old then. And it said in the paper the next day I would be 65 years old before I had any chance of release. So I would just, I thought my life was over. And I completely, just torched my own life and destroyed my own life, as well as, my son was 9 years old at the time, and now he was going to grow up without a father. And I was absolutely devastated, recognizing how all the selfish decisions I've been making for so long, putting my son's life at risk, my family's life at risk, and how I disappointed my family and my spiritual teacher and my community. So I was absolutely devastated. But I became radically dedicated to get all the negativity out of my life and leave a better legacy for my son than just his dad went to prison, or even his dad died in prison, because I had no surety that I would survive my time. But something happened before I was sentenced. I was, going to go to sentencing in the court the next day, and I was convicted of this so-called drug kingpin statute. The only reason I went to trial was because I don't believe I was a kingpin. I was involved in drug trafficking. I would have admitted that and just you know, put myself at the mercy of the court for sentencing. But I didn't feel I was guilty of this other charge, and it carried a no parole sentence. And I could have gotten anywhere from 10 years to life. And if I
Right.
got life, I would still be in prison today. So, I was pretty anxious that night. It was a long night. I couldn't sleep. They had me in an isolation cell. And, right before dawn, I stood up in the cell on top of this built in kind of steel sink and toilet. And there was a little window up high. And I wanted to get up. I just wanted to see outside. And so I could see the stars, and something came over me. I just felt something happen, and I got down. I sat down on the bunk in that cell, the bed in that cell, and I just suddenly felt this tremendous confidence and certainty that no matter what happened the next day, even if I got life in prison, that I would not give up on myself, I would not give up on my son, and I would not give up on life. That I was not going to give up, and I'm very grateful for that moment. It was a very powerful moment. And then when I did get to prison, I realized very quickly that I was in a very negative environment, full of anger and bitterness, and all the prisoners who society sees as perpetrators, they feel like victims, right? They feel, and many of them have been victimized in their childhood. Most people that end up in prison were victimized in their childhood. That's how they get there. But they also feel like, their sentencing was unfair. Maybe their crime partners, snitched on them. Their lawyer was no good. They have their whole victim story. And when you meet a prisoner, the first thing you do is you trade victim stories, right? And after I did that a couple of times, I didn't want to hear my own. I didn't want to hear others, which maybe wasn't very compassionate, but I just didn't want to live there. Fortunately, I'd had enough training already in the Buddhist tradition and psychology. I've been training as a Buddhist practitioner and teacher for 10 years already. And I had a master's degree in Buddhist and Western psychology. So I had a lot of training, and I recognized I didn't want to live that way. I didn't want to come out of prison. If I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to survive prison and get out someday, I didn't want to come out angry and bitter. And I didn't want to live that way in prison. So I realized that I had to focus 100% on taking ownership for having got myself into that situation, what I was going to do with it, and whether I could have a life afterwards. It was going to be completely up to me. Now, I could have easily focused on blame because, I did a lot of people's time. You know, Probably, 30, 40 different people testified against me and didn't have to go to prison. And that's the way the system works. So I did their time. Um, and when the government prosecutes you, they don't play by the rules. They break the law, they break the rules, they play hardball, right? They're just going to bury you, right? And so I could have been focused on all that. And I could have been angry and bitter, and spent all my time blaming the government and blaming my lawyer and blaming, former associates. But I just said that's going to take me nowhere. So I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to heal my relationship to anybody I feel anger about. And I use spiritual practices from my Tibetan Buddhist tradition to heal any enmity I was holding towards anyone. And I said, I'm focusing on, I got myself in here. Only my choices are going to get me through it and beyond it to do something with my life. So that's really where this idea of radical responsibility was born, taking 100% ownership for each and every circumstance we face in life, the ones we can see we had something to do with, but even the ones that, just seem to land, on our head, come out of the sky, and we feel we had no relationship to it. Still, at some point, the only really important question is, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to let it take me down? Or am I going to choose to move forward in my life in the most creative way possible? So that philosophy of radical responsibility was really born in my experience of coming to prison and having those insights. And then by employing that, I was able to use my time in prison to create all kinds of programs, to create 2 national organizations, to create the first hospice program in a prison anywhere, and to create 2 movements that are still thriving today. And you're not supposed to be able to do that from in prison. But I don't say that to pat myself on the back. I just say it that by focusing on ownership and choice instead of blame, I was able to accomplish a lot with my life. And when I did get out, I've had nothing but opportunity ever since.
Right, right. So at that point in time, you looked at the stars and you were thinking about the next morning, and you were even ready for a life imprisonment. But then it was perhaps 15 years. It was quite less after that. How did that happen?
Yeah, so I was sentenced prior to 1987. I was sentenced in 1985.
Okay.
And so I was sentenced under what they call the old law, because
Okay.
in the US federal system, they changed the sentencing laws and they actually got rid of parole. They got rid of parole and they went to sentencing guidelines. But fortunately, I was under the old law, so they still had parole. So if I'd been sentenced to 30 years with parole, I could have gone to the parole board after serving 1/3 and requested parole. Doesn't mean I would have gotten it, but I would have been reviewed every year from 10 years to 11 to 12. But since I had a no parole sentence, I was not eligible for parole. But also under the old law, there was a lot of what you call good time. So if you just stayed out of trouble on a sentence of my length, you got 10 days a month good time. And so on a sentence of 30 years, that reduces it by a big chunk. That would be that's 12 times 30. That's 3,600 months. So that's 360 months that come off. And so that's your statutory release date. And then if you stay out of trouble and keep a job while you're in prison, you get another 5 days a month. So that meant on 30 years, I would serve 18 and a half. Now, I didn't realize that. I was in prison for about 6 months before I even figured all that out. And it was a relief to, okay, if I stay out of trouble, I'll serve 18 and a half, not 30. It still felt like forever at that time, right? Felt like a
Right.
very dark tunnel. But then, of course, like everyone, I appealed my sentence, and my appeal took 2 or 3 years to go through the courts. And on appeal, my sentence was an aggregate sentence of 5 different charges that I was convicted of, all related to drug trafficking. Well, on the appeal, they knocked off 1 charge because I was convicted of both conspiracy and this so-called continuous criminal enterprise, which is another kind of conspiracy. They're not supposed to indict you on both because it confuses the jury, but they do it anyway. And, and then on appeal, they drop one. So that reduced my sentence from 30 to 25. So at that point, I then knew I would serve 14 and a half on 25 if I stayed out of trouble. Now, when I got to prison with my 30-year no parole sentence, that was a big deal. But within about 5 years, there were young men coming to prison with sentences of 40, 50, 60, 70 years for drug trafficking. And now there was no parole for anybody because after 1987, no parole. And the good time was reduced to only 54 days a year. If you stay out of trouble, that's it, 54 days a year. So that would be 540 days on a 10-year sentence. 30-year sentence would be 1,500 days, which is, maybe five. So you're going to, on a 30-year sentence, you're going to serve 25 years. And there's no way out of that. The only thing that would change that is a presidential pardon. So these young people coming into prison today with these huge sentences, they have no hope. And so prisons have become more dangerous because they have nothing to lose. They have no hope. They know they're going to be in prison forever, no matter what. Right. So anyway, I was lucky that I was sentenced under the old law. And eventually I did serve. I managed to stay out of trouble. And I worked hard at that because there's trouble everywhere in prison.
Right.
I worked hard at that. And I served 14 and a half years, which was still
Right.
a
The
long
whole
time.
right, right, sir. The point I wanted to bring was that you kept a very positive attitude all throughout from the very beginning,
Yes.
isn't it?
And it was hard. I mean, I was scared when I was during my trial. I spent 7 months in a really terrible county jail, just a horrible place. And I couldn't even sleep. I was having nightmares every night about going to prison, about being raped in prison. I'd watched lots of prison movies. I was terrified of going to prison. And when I got to prison, it's a terrible environment. And you have incredibly demeaning experiences with the correctional officers and with your fellow prisoners. On a good day, you only have 5 or 6, but it's a very negative environment, chaotic, noisy, um, and um, very dehumanizing, right? And so it really takes a lot of strength not to let
Right,
that take you down.
right,
I
right,
was lucky that I came there with 10 years of meditation practice and training. And and I became even more dedicated to practice in prison. I practiced a couple of hours of meditation every day. I studied sometimes more on weekends, even more. Studied the Dharma and psychology 3, 4 hours a day. My day job, I taught school. I was a school teacher. That was my day job in prison for 14 years. I spent my evenings and breaks doing hospice care up in the hospital because this is a federal prison hospital in the middle of the AIDS crisis. I was very involved in my own 12-step recovery from drug addiction and alcoholism. So I was a leader in that. And I taught meditation. I led a meditation group in the chapel. So I stayed very busy. I also, did exercise, got in good shape. So I kept myself really busy, but I did a lot of practice and a lot of study, and that's what gave me the resilience and the strength to keep a positive outlook in prison. In fact, because I intensified my practice so much, and because some of the inner practices of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition are so powerful, after I was in prison for 2 or 3 years, I really woke up every morning with a very cheerful mind. There was still the pain. The major pain for me was that my son was growing up without his dad, and he was in Peru with his mother, and I was separated from him. Pain was always there. But apart from that, I had a positive, cheerful mind, and that came out of deep meditation practice.
right, right. Talking of resilience, there is I guess, a global resilience summit also going on. If you can tell about that, and we'll come back to the topic again.
Yeah, sure. So, for a number of years, I've been putting on online summits where we gather together many powerful speakers, uh, and uh, and this one is 6 days long, and
Okay.
each day we have 6 or 7 speakers, and it's free. And the first day focuses on, and the overall inquiry of this summit is how can we all uh, develop and deepen and sustain the individual and collective resilience we need to deal with, the threat of climate change, the threat of nuclear war, ongoing wars and conflict, all the social strife and polarization in our world today. I mean, we live in a very challenging, daunting world today. And how are we going to deal with that individually? And how can we come together? We need resilience, right? So the first day focuses on individual resilience, the second day on healing trauma and relational resilience. The third day is on community, cultural, and collective resilience. The fourth day is all about climate resilience. The fifth day is about creating resilient systems. And then the sixth day, we hear from indigenous elders, indigenous wisdom holders about how to change our relationship with the earth based on ancestral and indigenous wisdom. So that's a completely free summit with 40 speakers. And you can go to www.globalresiliencesummit.org, globalresiliencesummit.org, and register for free, and you can enjoy the whole summit. We're halfway through it now, but you can still enjoy a lot of it. Actually, there's still 4 of the 6 days are still available right now, and it's amazing presenters. So anyway, people could check that out. It's free, and it's at globalresiliencesummit.org.
Great, sir. Great you shared about that so that people can, have a look. And learn a lot out of them. So coming back to the 1999 part of your life, sir, you came out of prison, but within the prison itself, I guess you founded Prison Mindfulness Institute and National Prison Hospice Association. So what are those? See, through this, I just want to understand the mindset of a person. A lot of people will just have very different feelings, but you were in the mode of in a very constructive mode. You were not blaming any situation or anything, and that is a very positive thing I see in you at that point in time. And how did you think about, how did you reach that particular sort of a mindset? Because it explains a
Yeah.
lot and teaches a lot of things.
Well, fortunately, I'd had a lot of training, and I had the very positive influence of my Tibetan Buddhist teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who died in 1987, 2 years after I went to prison. But he was someone who just 24/7 dedicated himself to the betterment of humanity. And he always focused more on what is skillful rather than what's right or wrong. Not that he didn't have a sense of morality and right or wrong, but he felt it was more important what's skillful and what's not skillful, what works, what doesn't work, right? So, instead of focusing in prison on, oh, that's so unjust and they can't do that. And, the correctional officer and staff there, I just said, okay, these are all human beings. They're here doing their job. And how can I relate with them in a way to get things done? Because I wanted to accomplish something with my life in prison. A lot of people in prison, they want to sleep through their time or just kind of numb out or, and that's understandable. But because I was already a practitioner, I wasn't going to throw away a big chunk of my life. I wanted to accomplish something with my life. And I was lucky that I could have a day job of teaching school that was very rewarding, helping people get a high school degree or study for college or learn to read and learning English and things like that. Um, and it was very rewarding to help people learn to meditate and be involved in the 12-step recovery programs and then the hospice work. But I realized if I was going to accomplish anything, I had to do it through being skillful, right? And so, I really worked with based on my Buddhist values of being self-disciplined and also compassionate and considerate and respectful. And I just very consistently showed up and found ways to get people to respond. And wasn't easy, but we managed to, through a lot of work, start the first hospice program in a prison anywhere in the world in 1987. This was the height of the AIDS epidemic, and they were bringing all the AIDS patients from all over the federal system in the U.S. to this prison, and they were dying in horrible conditions because there weren't any of the protease inhibitors or the triple drug cocktail or any of that thing. And they were just having every opportunistic infection you could imagine, dying in horror, and there was no pain care. Also, men were dying of cancer and liver disease, and there was no pain medication. It was horrible. And we applied and put in an application and talked to staff. And it took about a year and a half, but we finally got them to say, okay, we'll try this. And we brought outside people in to train a group of prisoners to be hospice volunteers. And we got that program started. And in 1988, we started seeing prisoners, seeing patients. And that was a big part of my life for the rest of my time in prison. I usually had 2, sometimes 3 patients. And I would spend my lunch hour, my evening, my dinner hour up there helping to feed them, helping them communicate with their family, helping to bathe them. And it was incredibly transformative uh, work to be able to put my focus on someone else's needs instead of my own, and also the confrontation with one's own mortality, because some of the patients I worked with who all became my friends, some were older than I was, some were the same age, some were younger. And I realized there, but for the grace of what everyone believes in, go I, right? I could have easily died in prison. And we even had 2 healthy hospice volunteers who were friends of mine. They were regular prisoners, they were hospice volunteers. They got sick and became hospice patients and died there. So anybody could die there. And also there was violence in the prison. You could die from violence. So this was very transformative work. And also, the meditation practice for me was so important, and then teaching meditation. And I started to write about that and published it in journals on the outside. And people started writing to me because a lot of prisoners around the country were writing to various Buddhist communities and other meditation communities, yoga communities, and so forth, and wanting help. And there was very little experience back then in prison ministry among Buddhist or yoga organizations. there was an active Christian prison ministry because Christianity is the dominant tradition in the United States. But there was very little organized, and so people didn't know what to do. So people started sending letters to me in prison, and I was actually able to communicate with prisoners in other state prisons and county jails, but not federal prisons. I couldn't communicate with prisoners in another federal prison. They didn't even like me doing the other, but they didn't stop it. And I realized, so I started, sending uh, letters to prisoners. And I worked in the education department. There was a copy machine there, and I could copy an article about meditation and send it to them. And I knew when they get this letter, it would be very powerful for them. So I was very inspired, but I quickly realized this is not something, it wasn't a need I could meet on my own. So I managed to start a nonprofit organization on the outside with a little help from friends and getting a little seed funding from family and friends. And that started what was called Prison Dharma Network, which is still the legal name of the organization. Today, we're better known as Prison Mindfulness Institute. And today, that's an organization that reaches tens of thousands of prisoners all over the world on a regular basis and has a Path of Freedom program, a mindfulness based emotional intelligence program that has been, the pandemic has kind of slowed everything down. But before the pandemic, it was in 20 states in the US and 7 different countries. And so that has grown to a worldwide movement. And also we're kind of like the network for that movement. So we have like 180 prison mindfulness organizations that belong to our network. So we've built this huge movement of people, volunteers that bring meditation and yoga into prisons and jails in the U.S. and around the world. And that just grew out of that inspiration. And the same thing with the hospice program. I started publishing and writing and got some interest and and uh, and then started another nonprofit to get that model that we developed there out into the world. And today there's probably 75 or 80 prison hospice programs in U.S. state and federal prisons as a
Right.
result of what we started back there. And so there's these two national movements that are, and even global movements, and they all came out of uh, my decision to embrace radical responsibility instead of blame. Right. And then
Right.
I was just at the right place at the right time and got support from a lot of people. But that's where it starts from. And uh,
Right.
and I'm very grateful that I made that choice to focus on responsibility instead of blame.
Right. Right. So when you came out of prison in 1999, if I'm correct, then normally people would like to, would look to build a life, rebuild a life, if they have a life at all after so many years. But I think when you came out, you had so much to look forward to. It's because of your mind, the way you used your Buddhism studies, your understanding, your spiritualism, and the way you did not blame everything else, but you started building on whatever you had. Am I right?
Yeah, I trained myself, in prison. I mean, I knew once I figured out the good time and once I got a reduction on appeal, at that point, I knew that I would be almost 50 years old when I got out. That I'd be almost 50 years old. And also, I had uh, the Internal Revenue Service in the U.S. had a judgment against me for $300,000. So I was going to be in debt, and I was going to be have a record as an ex-con, a prisoner, and I was going to be almost 50 years. So pretty hard to start a life or career that way. And I knew I really had to train myself. If I was going to have any opportunity, I had to really train myself. So, I spent 14 and a half years training myself and disciplining myself as well as creating value. And so I'm fortunate. When I got out of prison, I've just had nothing but opportunity ever since. In fact, the first year I was out, they wouldn't let me travel for the first 6 months, even out of state, because I was still under supervision. But about 8 months after I was out, I was invited to give a presentation at the American Psychiatric Association National Conference in New Orleans. So here I was 8 or 9 months out of prison presenting at a national conference. I mean, to understand the impact of that for me, because when you're in prison, you're regarded as less than human, right? You're a number, you're a thug, you don't count, you're less than human, right? And people, if you haven't been to prison, you don't know how dehumanizing that is, right? Now, I had the spiritual strength to not let that crush me, but it still is very impactful. And then to come out and be here presenting at a national psychiatric conference, that was incredibly empowering. And I've presented at, I don't know, 50 or 60 conferences like that in the last 22 or 23 years. So I've had nothing about opportunity, but it came out of the training I did. I trained myself on radical responsibility. I trained myself to have a positive outlook. I trained myself to be able to choose my direction. And so when I got out of prison, it was fairly seamless, except I'll have to say, when I got out of prison, I spent 6 months in a halfway house. So I didn't anticipate how difficult that was going to be. And it was like going to jail all over again. And it was kind of destabilizing. And it's really not a supportive environment. It's supposed to be, but it's not. It's all about control.
Right.
And
Right.
I was lucky to not get sent back to prison,
Right.
not because I was doing anything wrong, but
You
just because the system is so messed up, right? But the big thing when I got out of prison was how fast things were going. Like in prison, we had television, so we knew what was going on in the world, but I had no idea how fast things were. And I had hard trouble crossing a street at first. I mean, life was moving so fast. It took me a while to get used to that. But apart from that, I just had so many opportunities. I started teaching at university. So I had a 10-year career teaching at university right after I got out. I started a management consulting business based on how I'd learned to work with people, and I still do that work. And so it's been nothing but opportunity. But it really was from training myself. I was
right.
inspired by a lot of people, who did prison time, like uh, uh, like Eldridge Cleaver, like Malcolm X, like uh, no, the name part of my brain is faulting me right now, but Nelson
It's okay.
Mandela. Nelson
Nelson,
Mandela.
I
But
will
I
get
read
right.
I
Yes.
read the biographies of many activists who went to prison and how they trained themselves in prison. Taught themselves to read and write, taught themselves to become poets, taught themselves, and so I knew that if I was going to have a life beyond prison, I had to really train myself. So I did that and it worked. And I'm very grateful for that.
Right, sir. In fact, in Hinduism, they say that you can change your fate through your karma if you do good karma. And today, if you ask me, I see you as a acharya. You are a senior dharma teacher in the Buddhist in the Shambhala Buddhist community. And for me, acharya is a very revered word, even from an Indian point of view. So I would like to see you because your life is what you make of it, and you have shown through your own life that you have made it in a good life, and you are making the world a better place through whatever you are doing at the moment. And you see today what you are doing. You are teaching a lot of business people, executives, CEOs, all top people. And I guess when they are learning from you, it is the prison part is long. It's just like almost like a dream which is long gone.
Yeah, just to, give a sense of the audience what's possible. A lot of my work today, we work with prisoners around the world, but a lot of my work personally is training correctional officers and probation and parole officers and police. And so I'll get up in front of a room and introduce myself, and here I am, an ex-con, and and I'm their trainer for the day, right? But that's a big part of my work today. I have done training. We have a model called mindfulness-based wellness and resiliency, teaching public safety professionals, police, first responders, correctional officers, so forth, to work in ways that are less harmful to themselves, to more resilience, and don't create the trauma, because there's tremendous trauma among public safety professionals. And so we teach them how to work in new ways, which means they're going to have a better impact with the citizens and with people who are incarcerated. But anyway, I spend several days every week working with them, and I've trained probably at this point 4 or 5 thousand public safety professionals in mindfulness and wellness and resiliency. And who would have ever thought that a prisoner would end up training correctional officers, right? But that's
Yeah.
what's possible. That's what's possible through the power of uh, radical responsibility, letting go of blame, and realizing that blame, it's not to, we don't have to blame ourselves for blaming, right? I mean, it's
Right.
just human,
Right.
but we just need to realize it's inefficient. It's just kind of a wasted effort, you know. It doesn't do anything. But if I embrace, what are my choices? We say, the what I call the magical radical responsibility question is,
Yes.
any situation I'm in, no matter how terrible it is, or how unjust, or how unfair, or maybe my boss is a tyrant, or It's just a terrible, terrible situation. And if I can just ask myself this simple question, what can I do? What can I do? That gets me out of the victim mindset. Even if I really am being victimized, it gets me out of the victim mindset and gets me back into what I call the co-creative mindset, because there's always a million things we can do. There's so many different ways we can approach any person or any situation. And so if I keep thinking, what can I do? Where are my options? Where are my choices? What's the most creative way I can respond to this to move my life forward in and with others in a good way, right? So that question, what can I do? Or if we're part of a team, what can we do? What can we do? That shifts me into solution-based thinking and creative thinking, right? Instead of going, oh, I can't do anything and it's so horrible and I'm a victim and it's so unjust, and all that may be true, but what does it do? It just takes me down, right? So we shift to, okay, what can I do? This is really tough. This is hard. Maybe this is unjust, but what can I do? What's the most creative thing I can do to make it better?
So, can you tell us more about this radical responsibility model that you have, sir, so that our audience can understand what exactly? See, you are a
Yeah.
very you are a tough man. You are a spiritual man. You could come out through those times, but not everybody is like you, and there will be only very few of you, perhaps in day to day life. But how can they, as lesser mortals, how can they deal with a
Well, yeah,
situation when
yeah.
whatever tough situation that they are in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like anybody else. I'm an ordinary human being. I get caught up in blaming. I have all the same struggles as anybody else, but I've learned not to get caught there, not to get lost there, to continually shift, come back to, right? And radical responsibility, I say it's voluntarily embracing 100% ownership or responsibility for each and every circumstance I face in life, including the ones I can see I had some relationship in creating or allowing, which very often I did have some relationship to it. But even the ones that feel like they just fell out of the sky and landed. I mean, everybody would agree I'm innocent, and I had nothing to do with it. But still, at some point, the question is, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to let it take me down, or am I going to find some creative way to respond to it? Right. So it's living at choice. It's focused on what are my choices, instead of buying into the idea that I don't have choices, because we always have choice. Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, was a psychiatrist of Jewish background whose whole family was sent to the death camps in World War II and the Holocaust, and he himself was in Auschwitz, the most infamous death camp of
Yeah.
the Nazi Holocaust. And he was a psychiatrist and a thinker, so he was reflective, and he was seeing that some people are surviving and some people are dying quickly, and he wanted to survive, and he discovered two really important things about life. He discovered, one, the people that were surviving had some vision for a future. They had a will to live. For some of them, they just wanted to get out and testify to what happened there, to the truth of what happened. He would envision being back in his life, completing his academic work and his papers and presenting at conferences as a psychiatrist and a researcher. And he kept envisioning a future, and that kept him going. But the other thing he discovered was, even in the worst situation you could ever imagine, and being at Auschwitz in a Nazi death camp is about as
Right.
bad as it gets. Starving, emaciated, in the cold with hardly any clothing in the middle of a Polish winter. It's hardly, you can't imagine anything worse. Maybe a guard even has a gun pointed at your head. He said, even in that situation, we still have choice. We still have choice.
But
And
do
we
we
may
need?
not even choose to live or die, because maybe the guard's going to pull the trigger, but we have a choice on the attitude we bring to that situation, right? If we're going to die, we can die like Gandhi died, with God, the word of God on his lips, you know, and we can choose how we die if we're going to die, but mostly it's choosing how to live, and we can choose the attitude we're going to bring to situations. We always have choice. Nobody can take that choice away from us. Now, it can be a tough choice, because if we've been choosing the victim mindset our whole life, it's going to be hard to change that like that. So we need to start practicing with the little things in life, and realizing when I'm getting a little irritated. So, okay, what's really going on there? Where's my choice, right? Because if we practice with the small challenges of life, when we get hit with the big challenges, then we'll have the wherewithal to embrace choice instead of falling into the victim mindset and letting life take us down instead of being able to, stay on our feet and bring value to life. And life is not going to get any easier. Clearly, with climate change and climate disruptions, life is going to get very challenging all over the world, and we need more resilient people. And we get resilient through ownership. And so, that's obviously something I'm very passionate about. But I see so much of people's well-intended efforts at social justice and social change. They're well-intended. They're concerned about the same suffering and injustice I am, but their strategies are based in blaming and shaming. And I don't think it helps. I think it just keeps the cycle of conflict and suffering going. So I am passionate about getting across this idea that real transformation and the transformation we need to do together comes through ownership, not blame. And that's another important thing about the radical responsibility model, because some people, when they first hear about it, well, they say, well, that sounds like blaming yourself. Okay, you're not going to blame anybody else. That means you're blaming yourself. No, this model is getting beyond blame altogether. It has nothing to do with blaming others, obviously, but it has nothing to do with blaming myself. Nothing. And it certainly has nothing to do with blaming victims. When I look into situations to see if I had a role in the situation, that's not to blame myself. That's just for learning. Because if I can see, okay, I'm here and I don't like it, and here were the steps to get there, and I get that insight of my part in that, then I go, oh, I'll do it different next time. I learned something. I have insight. I could have taken a right instead of a left, right? And so I'm going to do it different next. So it's only for learning, never for blame, right? And it's all about embracing choice and really personal power. Radical responsibility could be called radical self-empowerment, because I'm choosing to place my energy where it can do the most good with my own choices and my own actions. But it's not about blaming myself. And in fact, the radical responsibility model is grounded in deep self-compassion. The first chapter of the radical responsibility book is about embracing the idea of innate basic goodness, that all human beings have innate basic goodness, that we're not broken, we don't need fixing, that we have an inner wholeness that has been called Buddha nature or Krishna nature or Christ nature. It's our innate divinity, goodness, and wholeness. We're not broken. Now, on the surface, yeah, we have lots of challenges, right? But in the depth of our being, we're not broken. And we can feel that depth through meditative practices. We can drop into below the surface and into that depth and realize I am okay and experience that innate wholeness, goodness, sacredness, divinity. And we can experience that. And that gives us tremendous strength. And then the second chapter is all about having a mindfulness practice, developing more awareness so we can actually see how our mind works and see how the connection between thoughts and feelings and behaviors and how all our habitual patterns and our psychology and conditioning works, because we have to see it to get free from it. And we do all this with self compassion and self acceptance. So it has absolutely nothing to do with blaming ourselves. But we've all been enculturated into this idea that somebody's always going to be blamed. It's not true. We can step out of blame altogether. So radical responsibility has nothing to do with blame, not blaming others, not blaming myself, and not blaming victims. It's all about living at choice and putting my energy where it can do the most good, which is with the choices I make every day.
Okay. Okay. So if there is something which is happening in one's life, they just, how do they just build up? They just say, okay, I'm not blaming myself, I'm not blaming anybody else. But then what does he do? He or she?
Well, if something in our life is not working, right? First, we can get really honest and look, okay, what is my contribution to that? Not to blame myself, but to learn. Like, how did I get into that situation? Because if I can learn how I got into it, I can learn how to get out of it or avoid it next time. So that's purely for learning, not for blaming oneself. There's no reason to feel we're all human beings. We're all doing our best. Life is hard, right? We all got what we got as children, and it was a mixed bag for all of us. We get a lot of negative conditioning, and the human condition is we start off as these very fragile beings, and then we try to paste together some sense of self just to survive in life. And it's a fear-based construct that most of the spiritual traditions are about moving beyond. But first, we have to have an integrated self to begin with. And a lot of us, because of childhood traumas, aversive childhood experiences, we have a lot of struggles. We have a lot of conditioning. We have like a lot of faulty wiring in our nervous system. So we need to embrace, okay, I could blame my parents for that, but then I'd have to blame their parents and their parents and their, it's just a human condition. So
Okay.
instead, if I have problems, I need to heal myself. I need to do self healing. I need to do meditation. I need to maybe get involved in some kind of therapy,
Okay.
whatever I need to do. And then, okay, I need to train myself to make better choices, right? And so I train myself to live at choice and get the help I need to heal myself if I need help healing myself, and develop some kind of awareness practice that lets me understand how the mind works and how the mind body is connected and how life works, right? We need to Education is the answer to everything, right? If we don't educate ourselves and we don't have some kind of awareness practice, it's like we're walking through life blindfolded, right? And
Right.
and of course we're gonna just constantly run into things, right? So we need to be awake and aware, and we need to educate ourselves and train ourselves. And that, for me, that's what being a human being is all about. I feel like a human being is about being in training until the day I die. And I'm training to die because we're all going to die. We don't know what happens when we die. Different philosophical and religious traditions have different ideas. You know, personally, I feel there's probably multiple lifetimes that we go through. But, regardless, how we die is very important. And, if I want to die well, I need to train myself to die well. But to me, it's about being in training, always evolving, growing, thriving, right? As human beings, we're conscious beings. We're conscious beings, and we have the wherewithal to continually evolve and grow and experience life in its great fullness and add value to life, add value to our family, to our community, right? So challenging ourselves to be the very best we can be, but also doing that with compassion because life is hard and we're doing our best, and we're gonna go have ups and downs, right? And so beating ourselves up doesn't help at all, but focusing on how can I keep growing? How can I keep growing? What's the way forward, right?
Right. Right. In fact, live fearlessly and die fearlessly,
Absolutely.
isn't it? Okay. Okay, sir. So the bigger question now is, when do you start finding your purpose, the highest purpose in your life? What is the time for it? Does it come to you, or as you said, but not everybody is so lucky.
Yeah,
So that is,
well,
what is the time?
I think again it's about um I think it's very helpful to develop some kind of awareness practice where we spend time just being quiet, listening, some kind
Okay.
of meditation, right? I also mentioned before a journaling practice, writing. The combination of those two things will get us more in relationship with ourselves, to understand ourselves. And I think in that way, our purpose in life will emerge. It may emerge subtly, slowly over time, or may just suddenly, arrive. But, it's about, developing an inner life, listening to ourselves inwardly, listening to our heart, listening to our feelings. And so both journaling, writing, and meditating, some kind of meditation practice will help us, I think, discover what our purpose is. And if we're not sure, we can also just get out and start serving because there's so much, there isn't a community in the world where we live that doesn't need help, where there aren't people that need help. So we can just get out and start serving and see what calls us, right? We can try this and try that. We can get involved in feeding the hungry, or we can get involved in visiting people who are sick, and or visiting people who are dying, or working with children, or supporting people in prisons, or we just try different things until we find, oh, this is mine. This one, yeah, I feel this. This is me, right? Yeah.
Right, sir. Right. A lot of things you have shared. Now, look, my last question is, sir, how do you look back at your life as you from where you are now? From
Yeah. Well, I think there's two basic ways that I see that and feel about that. On the one hand, I have no regrets. My life path has been my life path, and I've learned a lot from it, and it's produced who I am today. I'm grateful to be able to bring some value to the world today and have opportunities to share and bring value to others' lives. I'm incredibly grateful for that. It's a profound honor to be able to do that, and and all that is based on my whole life experience, every bit of it, right? At the same time, I know that along my life path, I caused harm. And so I have a lot of regrets about that. I have a lot of regrets that my son grew up with his dad in prison. I have a lot of regrets that I was involved in drug trafficking, and I know that the drugs cause harm to people. So I have a lot of regrets about any harm that I caused to anyone along my life path. And at the same time, on another level, I have no regrets about my life because it's created the person I am today and what I have to offer.
Lots of philosophy involved in what you are saying, sir. Lots of it. But as they say, life is what you make of it. And you have made it a very, very wonderful life. Not only for yourself, but a lot of people across the world. On this note, sir, it's a wrap on this edition of the KJ Masterclass. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ajay. It's a privilege and honor to be able to be with you and your audience today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.